Denver International Airport sits on roughly 33,531 acres, a footprint larger than Manhattan, Boston, and San Francisco combined. Most passengers never see more than a terminal, a train ride, and a parking garage. But every square foot of that land has to be maintained, insured, patrolled, and kept compliant with federal aviation rules, whether 10 flights land today or 100. Before we continue, if you want to understand how these businesses actually work, the math behind what looks easy to own, subscribe to the channel. We break down the economics of things most people only see from the outside. Airports feel like toll booths for the sky. One road in, one road out, and everyone who uses the infrastructure pays. No competitor can build a second airport next door and undercut you on price. That mental model is not wrong. It is incomplete, because the distance between that fantasy and a profitable balance sheet is measured in billions of dollars, decades of regulation, and cost structures that barely flinch when passenger numbers collapse. The most profitable airports in the world figured out long ago that passengers are not the only product. Singapore Changi Airport treats retail and food as core infrastructure, not an afterthought. Jewel Changi, the dome with the indoor waterfall, is not decoration. It is a traffic magnet that keeps people on the property longer, spending in shops and restaurants before and after flights. Changi has repeatedly ranked among the world's highest earners on non-aeronautical revenue per passenger because it engineered dwell time the way a mall developer engineers foot flow. Amsterdam Schiphol plays a similar game with a different accent. Schiphol is one of Europe's busiest hubs and one of its most commercially aggressive airports. Parking, landside retail, food and beverage, and real estate around the airfield contribute a massive share of total revenue. In many years, non-aeronautical income rivals or exceeds what the airport earns from airline fees. The terminal is a shopping district that happens to have gates attached. That is not an accident. It is the business model. Contrast that with how most Americans encounter airport ownership. In the United States, the vast majority of major airports remain publicly owned by cities, counties, or regional authorities, and financed through tax-exempt municipal bonds rather than sold to private buyers. Denver International is operated by the city and county of Denver. LaGuardia's redevelopment involved private partners, but the underlying asset is not a stock you buy on Tuesday. Globally, the picture flips. More than 850 airports worldwide include some form of private investment. In Europe, roughly 3/4 of passenger traffic flows through airports with private ownership or long-term concessions. Latin America built much of its modern airport system on concession models. The US is the outlier, which matters if you are an American viewer imagining you can simply purchase O'Hare. Governments sell or partially sell airports in three main ways: outright privatization, long-term concessions of 40 to 99 years with eventual reversion to the state, or public listings where investors buy shares. The concession model became dominant because politicians get a large upfront payment or revenue share without permanently losing control of a strategic asset. In 2002, the Australian government leased Sydney Airport for 99 years. 2 decades later, a consortium of Australian pension funds acquired full control for approximately AUD 32 billion, the largest infrastructure acquisition in Australian history. The buyers considered it reasonable. That tells you how investors see these assets. When professionals value an airport, they compare purchase price to EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. A healthy major airport often trades between 15 and 23 times annual EBITDA. The Sydney deal closed during a period when travel was still recovering from the pandemic. Buyers were not paying for 2022 cash flow alone. They were paying for a monopoly position over a growing city for decades. You are not buying this year's profit. You are buying a permanent toll position on a metropolitan area's connection to the world, as long as people keep flying. What if you cannot buy an existing airport and want to build one instead? Start with land. A modern international hub requires roughly 20 to 50 square miles of flat, legally clear territory. Denver's 53 square miles is extreme even by global standards, but it illustrates the scale. Acquiring land, clearing title, compensating displaced communities, and avoiding protected zones can cost hundreds of millions before foundations are poured. Runways are not roads. They are layered engineering structures built to absorb the repeated impact of 400-ton aircraft landing at high speed, tens of thousands of times per year, for decades. A single major runway in a developed country often costs more than $1 billion. Terminals are not buildings. They are small cities. Immigration, security, baggage systems, retail concourses, HVAC for cathedral-scale spaces, and software that must never fail in public. Denver International itself is a masterclass in how construction risk shows up on an owner's balance sheet decades later. The airport opened in 1995, roughly $2 billion over its original budget, already a warning sign, and its automated baggage system became a national punchline when bags went missing, belts jammed, and the city spent years fixing engineering that looked brilliant on paper and miserable in practice. Passengers today ride trains between concourses and rarely think about it. Bondholders and city officials who lived through the overruns remember that an airport's price tag is not the ribbon-cutting ceremony. It is every change order, every failed test, and every year of interest on debt before the first passenger pays a parking fee. Berlin Brandenburg Airport tells the European version of the same story. It opened 9 years late, cost roughly $7 billion, more than triple early estimates, and opened into a global travel collapse. The project's lead advisor said publicly it might never reach profitability without ongoing public support. The delay was not weather or labor alone. Fire safety systems failed tests, escalators were missized, documentation gaps forced rework on finished sections. Every regulatory finding stopped construction and restarted design. 2 continents, 2 decades apart, same lesson. The hardest part of airport economics is not attracting passengers once the doors open. It is surviving the decade before they do. If this has been useful so far, a like helps more people discover this content. Revenue splits into 2 worlds: what regulators allow on the aeronautical side, and what the market will bear on everything else. Airlines pay landing fees, gate charges, and per-passenger facility charges. At major hubs, a wide-body arrival can cost thousands of dollars before a single bag is loaded. Each departing passenger triggers fees that, stacked together, can exceed $40 per person at busy airports. That sounds like excellent money until you learn that governments in most countries cap how fast those charges can rise. The logic is straightforward. Airports are monopolies. If you want to fly to Amsterdam, Schiphol is the option. Without regulation, the only airport in a city could extract unlimited rent from airlines and indirectly from every ticket buyer. Regulators set ceilings. When the ceiling drops or inflation outpaces approved increases, the airport earns less per passenger, even though the cost of maintaining terminals, runways, and security stays the same or rises. Parking sits on the other side of that line. At many large airports, parking and ground transportation represent nearly half of non-aeronautical commercial income. Premium short-term parking at major hubs can run $30 to $50 per day. And unlike aeronautical charges, no regulator is micromanaging the daily rate on row 7 of the garage. Retail inside the terminal runs on minimum annual guarantee contracts. When an airport grants space to a luxury brand or a restaurant chain, the tenant commits to pay either a fixed percentage of gross sales, often 16% to 20%, or a predetermined annual minimum, whichever is higher. A bad year for the perfume counter still pays the guarantee. Airport commercial income is protected on the downside in a way airline-facing revenue often is not. Car rental counters, hotel shuttles, currency exchange kiosks, and duty-free operators sit on the same logic at different margins. Changi and Schiphol both expanded commercial square footage inside security perimeters because a passenger who clears immigration early is a passenger with 30 extra minutes to buy food, gifts, and upgrades. INA, the operator of Madrid Barajas and Barcelona El Prat, among others, reports commercial revenue per passenger that would make many US mall owners jealous, not because Spanish travelers are uniquely spendthrift, but because the airport operator treats every minute in the terminal as leasable attention. In the United States, where airlines historically kept more power over terminal economics, that commercial intensity developed more slowly. Another reason American public airports can look shabby while still carrying billions in bond debt on the balance sheet of a city you never associated with aviation finance. Then there are the costs that do not care about passenger volume. Runways and terminals must meet safety standards 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Emergency generators must power critical systems through outages. Fire and rescue crews must be staffed around the clock, including at 3 a.m. for a delayed cargo flight. In northern latitudes, snow removal fleets of plows, sweepers, and de-icing equipment cost millions each and must be ready instantly. A 2-hour runway closure costs money and reputation. None of this scales down cleanly when traffic drops. The American financing model deserves its own sentence because it shapes who actually owns the economics, even when no private equity fund holds the deed. Major U.S. airports issue municipal bonds, tax-exempt debt repaid from landing fees, gate rents, parking, and concessions rather than from general city taxes. Denver, Atlanta, Dallas-Fort Worth, and dozens of others carry billions in outstanding bonds tied to terminal expansions, runway upgrades, and people mover systems. Bondholders are the quiet co-owners of the airport's future cash flow. If passenger traffic stalls for years, debt service does not pause for sympathy. That is one reason U.S. Airports fought hard to restore traffic after 2020, even when public health guidance was ambiguous. The fixed payment schedule was never ambiguous. In early 2020, the worst-case scenario for any business with huge fixed costs and variable revenue happened to every airport simultaneously. In April of that year, roughly 2/3 of the world's commercial aircraft were parked. Industry passenger revenue fell by hundreds of billions of dollars in a single year. Airports that survived best pivoted fast, opening cargo capacity on idle passenger gates, using empty aprons for freight staging, and in some cases loading cargo into passenger cabins when belly hold space vanished. It was not elegant. It kept the lights on. Not every airport faces the same problem because not every airport has passengers to lose. A facility handling fewer than 1 million passengers per year almost always loses money. There are not enough travelers to generate the retail spend, parking income, and aeronautical charges needed to cover a building that must remain open around the clock regardless of traffic. Those airports survive because governments subsidize them for political reasons: rural connectivity, regional development, prestige. The interesting failure mode is the small airport that tries to grow without that support and without realistic demand. Ciudad Real Central Airport in Spain is the cautionary tale. Built during a mid-2000s construction boom, it was marketed as an alternative to Madrid Barajas, one of Europe's longest runways, a terminal sized for 10 million passengers annually, and plans for high-speed rail links. Investors assumed Madrid would run out of capacity and that a well-connected site 120 miles south would capture overflow. The airport opened in 2008. Within 2 years, the operator was bankrupt. By 2012, it was closed. Airlines did not want to serve a city of 75,000 people 2 hours from the market that mattered. A $1 billion structure with no purpose followed. At bankruptcy auction, one bid came in at $10,000, rejected by the court. It eventually sold for a fraction of construction cost and later found second life as aircraft storage and dismantling. Hub airports play a different game entirely. Frankfurt Airport, operated by Fraport, is one of Europe's busiest cargo gateways and one of its most important connection points. Airlines cannot easily walk away, not because there is no alternative on a map, but because entire networks are built around passengers expecting to connect through Frankfurt. Removing it would cost carriers traffic on multiple continents. That is the competitive moat that separates a major hub from a regional field. The small airport needs airlines. The great hub is a destination airlines cannot afford to ignore. Looking forward, planners talk about the aerotropolis, building cities around airports rather than connecting airports to existing cities afterward. Logistics parks, offices, hotels, and manufacturing tied to air cargo grow on land airports already control. Denver's enormous footprint is partly a bet on that future. Room to expand runways, develop surrounding property, and absorb growth without the constraints tighter urban airports face. Changi's dual expansion is the passenger-facing version of the same strategy. Give people reasons to show up even when they are not flying. So does owning an airport work? The honest answer depends entirely on scale and location. A regional field under 1 million passengers is almost certainly a permanent subsidy story. A well-placed hub with tens of millions of passengers, strong non-aeronautical income, and regulatory stability can be one of the most durable assets on Earth, which is why pension funds fight over them. An airport is not just a runway and a terminal. It is a monopoly on every flight into and out of a city, with a cost base that behaves like a utility and a revenue base that behaves like a mall, an airline vendor, and a parking operator stacked together. In the right place, that combination prints money for decades. In the wrong place, it is a concrete monument to a demand forecast that never arrived. The question is not whether airports can be profitable. Many are. The question is whether you can survive the path from groundbreaking to the year the math finally works. And what happens the next time the world stops flying? What business should we break down next? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe and hit the bell so you do not miss the next one. See you there. You.